Okay guys, today we're going to be talking about absolute value. So you should have gotten an interactive notebook page and hopefully cut it out. And we're going to glue it in just like this with the absolute value square up here. Make sure you cut out these things so that they become flaps. Our number line is under it. The number line is really just for guidance. In this lesson, I am by now positive that you can draw a number line with positive values and negative values, and don't forget those arrows. Those arrows are essential. And then under it, we're going to have that kind of spider thing again, so we can flip up the tabs and write our answers underneath. But first, let's go ahead and start with what is absolute value. This week, we've been talking a lot about positive and negative numbers and how we find them on a number line. And absolute value goes right along with that. We learned that positive numbers are greater than 0, and negative numbers are, of course, then less than 0. 0 is kind of that middle number. 0 is neither positive nor negative, and that's where it becomes really important with absolute value. Because absolute value, and the definition is, the distance an integer is from 0. Distance an integer is from 0. So if I was to look at the absolute value of 6, and I draw these just straight lines around the 6, that shows absolute value. And in fact, that's going to be our fact. It uses vertical bars to show absolute value. That's our fact. So if I was to take the absolute value of 6, I'm going to want to know how far 6 is from 0. So here's my 6, and I count the number of tick marks until I get to 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the distance from 6 to 0 is 6. That may seem pretty easy. We have a positive 6. It's 6 away from 0. We've done this before. You've probably seen this in an earlier grade. Where it becomes a little bit trickier is when we have the absolute value of a negative 6. This is the first time we're seeing integers with negative numbers. So to find the absolute value of a negative 6 is a new concept. So we come back down to our number line and we find negative 6. So it's going to be just past this negative 5. And then again, I count the distance towards 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, it's 6. Anytime I take an absolute value just like this, whether the inside number is positive or negative, I should get a positive answer over here. If the inside of the absolute value is positive or negative, it does not matter, it's the inside value, my answer will always be a positive number. Now there's something different when there's a negative sign outside the absolute value. Then my answer, I should do the absolute value first and then apply my negative sign. So I would say the absolute value of 6 is 6, like we learned up here, and then I would take the negative of that. So the absolute value of 6 is 6, the negative of 6 is negative 6. Let's just take a minute to let that kind of sink in. So this is kind of what I put under my examples, except for I had 7s. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. The absolute value of negative 7 is also 7. Remember, it doesn't matter what I have inside, I should get a positive answer. Until I start sticking the negative signs on the outside of my absolute value. This says the negative of the absolute value of 7. So I take the absolute value of 7, I saw up here it was 7, and I take the negative of that, and that's how I get negative 7 as my answer. Likewise, down here, the negative of the absolute value of negative 7. The absolute value of negative 7, if I look up to the second line, the absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. So I should have the negative of that answer, positive 7, and that's how we get negative 7 as our answer. Non-examples. What does not qualify? Negative 1/2, negative 8, 2. First of all, none of them have the absolute value vertical bars around it. And even if I was to put the absolute value of something like negative 8, I would not get negative 8 as an answer. My answer to that should be positive. Since there's no negative out front, anything I put in the absolute value bars will give me a positive answer. So again, we're going to jump down. This number line is just for you to count and see where we're going with things. So we're going to go ahead and jump down to the examples at the bottom. So this one, the absolute value of 5. The absolute value of 5. So that's just a distance 5 is from 0. If I know it in my head already, I can write that down. Otherwise, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the absolute value of 5, we're checking it, it's 5. The absolute value of 0. This one is pretty intuitive. 0 is 0 away from 0 because it is itself. This is that reflexive property taking place here. If you don't remember the reflexive property from last year, we will go over all the properties a little later this year. So the absolute value of 0 is 0. The absolute value of negative 6. Well, I count the distance negative 6 is from 0. If you remember my example from up top, this one should already have an answer. The absolute value of negative 6 is 6. This is where it gets kind of tricky because this negative sign is on the outside of the absolute value. So the first thing I need to do is take the absolute value of 2. The absolute value of 2. So if I know the absolute value of 2, I can write that down. Otherwise, I come to my number line, I find 2, should be about here, and I count the distance to 0. 1, 2. It's 2 spaces. So the absolute value of 2 is 2, but remember there's that negative sign out front, and I need to use that. So my answer will be negative 2. It's a little tricky, and that's okay. Same thing with this one. Let's see if we can work that out. I'll give you a minute to figure out an answer. The negative of the absolute value of negative 3. So just take a minute to work that out. And when we're looking for an answer for that, we take the absolute value of negative 3. So if I find negative 3 on the number line, it should be here. And its distance to 0 is 1, 2, 3. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Now again, I have that tricky negative sign outside the absolute value. So I have the negative of whatever that absolute value was, and that was 3, so I have negative 3. So So that is what you should have written under there. Good job, guys. These two with the negatives out front of the absolute value, this would be something I'd expect to see as a bonus on the quiz on Friday. The rest of these would be a regular problem on the quiz Friday. So this is the absolute value of -10. Again, I'll give you a few minutes or a minute to do that. When we either know this, find it out mentally, or if we go to the number line, here's -10, it's distance to 0. We should count 10 spaces. The absolute value of -10 is 10. If you need to draw a number line on the quiz, please feel free to do that. If you can solve it without a number line, that's okay too. Whatever you do, just make sure you show whatever work you're doing. So absolute value, that's kind of it in a nutshell. But it definitely helps us out with the stuff we've been covering this week. And so I've selected some problems that should not only go over absolute value, but also use absolute value to help review you for the quiz Friday. So the sub should have a sheet that has the review problems I'm assigning. You're going to work on these in class, and if you don't finish, take them home. You should take them home anyways, because these really are for your use to review. These problems were ones that I might have pulled quiz questions from. So on page 151, the front of the sheet, it should have the review problems will be 25 to 33. So this section. 25, it's just finding the absolute value of these numbers. 29 is, again, one of those tricky ones that I might use for a bonus. The rest of these four are fair game for a quiz. This is something we did the first day when we went over positive and negative numbers and where we could find them on a number line. So 5 to the right of -5, we'd start at -5 and count 5 to the right. Hopefully you remember doing that. There will be at least one question like these four on the quiz. And I expect you not only to be able to solve it, but have a number line there and show me with a number line. Here's 5. 5 to the right. Well, let's do this. Here's 5. Oh. 5 to the right of 5 is 10. Here's my tick mark. Here's my arrow pointing right, and so on. I know that wasn't the problem that was here, but just as another example. And then on the back side of the sheet, it should have this page, page 153, and for review problems, I'd like you to do 9 to 24, so this section, comparing them. So you can compare regular integers like -10 and +6, which one's bigger. But you'll also do some with absolute value. So the absolute value of -8 and the absolute value of +7, which one of those is bigger? So solve the absolute values first, then compare using less than, equal to, or greater than. The quiz, in terms of one question, will look like one of these four. And then for comparing integers, I'll ask you to order them least to greatest. So if you want to pick some problems from here to work, there will probably be like 2 that look like some of these on the quiz, or they could be greatest to least, but I think they'll probably be least to greatest. And then there'll be a question with a 4-part absolute value, not comparing, but just solving an absolute value like here. And then the 5th problem, I told you the other day, was going to be kind of like these sometimes, always, nevers that we did. These are really good, not only quiz, but test questions to use in the future. And you may see a bonus on there. So go ahead and do these review problems. Again, if you don't finish them during class, they are for homework. They're the best way to study for this quiz. I wrote the quiz and I pulled problems from these 2 pages. If you do the selected problems and maybe try some of the others, you should do very well on the quiz. So you're going to do this today, you'll go over them tomorrow, and then tomorrow there should also be a mathletics thing to help you review for the quiz on Friday. Good luck. I hope you don't need it, but if you need it, I hope you find it, and I miss you guys lots.